Welcome to the Dapper community call. This is a very special one. It's the first one after the release of version 1.0 yesterday. We're glad to have everybody. Hoping that we even have some new members today. Feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat as we go along. And if you have any questions, we're happy to unmute you as well. We usually leave some time at the end for open discussion about anything. So even if we don't get to your question in the specific segment, we'll get there at some point, hopefully. So yeah, let's get started. Today, we're gonna do a little bit of a reset in a sense, and just say hello to everybody, and kind of maybe introduce the maintainers of the Dapper project that are on the call, and so you can kind of see some of the people behind the usernames on GitHub. I'll give an overview of last week's release, and we already have even some numbers on what we saw from everything we can measure around the release, which is pretty exciting. Mark is going to update us on a bunch of stuff that was kind of defined as part of the version 1.0 release that has to do with component certification, versioning, version support, and so on. And finally, Yaron and Artur are going to share some of the recent performance numbers and results of the latest security audit that we had for Dapper, which is also some great content. And as I said, as always, we try to keep some time for general questions and whatnot. So with that, let's get started. Yeah, so welcome everybody. If you haven't been on a community call before, we're glad to have you. And these community calls are a place to have everybody, the community to come join together. We do usually have demos and kind of like show and tells about different things, whether it's samples or projects or people using Dapper. We also discuss proposals and get feedback on different things like a release or a specific feature, and just a place for the community to come together and discuss various aspects of the project. So thank you for joining, and if you're just watching this on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. That's also great. And I just want to reiterate some of the resources that if you don't know about with the project, we got a community repo on GitHub, which is the place to kind of see how this community manages the different roles in there, what are the dates and times of these community calls, and some other resources. We also have a Discord server, which is getting a lot of new participants now, which is terrific. And that is the place where we really want people to come in and ask questions, have discussions. And really, if you're on the call and you've been here, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, I think most of the people on the call are kind of returning folks. We'd love for you to jump on Discord and help some new people answer their questions and kind of jump in there with your experience and your knowledge of Dapper, because this really is about the community. So that's the Discord server. Of course, we got the docs and the blog, which are always good to know about. Specifically the blog, that's where we make announcements, and we're going to see some more content coming in. There's always an open invitation. If you have something interesting to share and you want to blog about it, you're welcome to reach out to me, and we can figure out how to do that. We've had some recent great ones from Xavier and from Robert, who are on the call, I believe, and also from Harry, who was also on the call from New Relic. So there's a bunch of really good stuff that's happening with the blog. And finally, the docs. The docs are the place where, not only do we have all the latest and greatest information about the different features and so on, it is a work in progress. It's always changing. We're always trying to improve it. We're seeing a lot of the issues that you folks are opening, which is terrific, and a lot of the PRs coming in, which is great. And with that, I actually want to maybe, while we're talking about that, I do want to show a few quick things. So if this is the docs website, For anybody who has not yet contributed to Dapper in general or to the doc specifically, under the contributing section, there is a bunch of resources on how to contribute with docs specifically, because we're using Hugo and we're trying to have some consistency around language and tone. There's a lot of information about that. There's also the branch guidance, which you should know about if you're committing to the docs repo. Just to maybe make a quick note about that, on GitHub in the docs repo, we always have in the README, when we try to keep this updated, kind of like a little bit of a menu of which branch you should be thinking about if you're making a contribution. If it's the current, this is the branch of the current website, docs.dapr.io. In this case, it's the version 1.0. And this is where if you see broken links, if you see things that require clarification, or maybe anything that applies to the current version needs to go here. Anything that is added to the next version, because maybe there's a new feature that needs to be documented, that goes to the pre-release branch. In this case, that's going to be version 1.1. So this is kind of like general guidance for docs contributions. I just kind of took the opportunity to talk about that. But just going back to the deck, yeah, these are the resources. Hopefully you know all about them. If not, that's a great refresh to have. And with that, Yaron, do we want to start maybe having a round of people who are maintainers on the project to kind of introduce themselves?
Yeah, sure, we can do that, and I'll go ahead and open my cam.
Yeah, well, I guess I can start also, because
can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Great, cool. So hey everyone, my name is Yaron Schneider. I work for Microsoft. I'm a core maintainer on the Dapper project, located in Washington State, United States. I started on Dapper pretty much from the beginning. Thank you all for joining. New people, it's really good to see you here. Recurring people, awesome to see you here again. And yeah, let's have a great Dapper session today.
Great. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I'm Mark Fussell, and I'm a program manager who works at Microsoft. And I've been one of the first founders of Dapper project when we've kicked it off a couple of years ago. And it's great to meet you all here, and wonderful to have all of the experiences we have with the community.
Cool, I'll go next. Hey, I'm Ryan. I'm the maintainer for the .NET SDK. And I probably was maybe one of the first non-team contributors to Dapper. Prior to this, I was doing a bunch of different ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core kind of tech. So I was the main architect on MVC, Web API, Razor Pages, and also worked on Blazor and Razor Compiler and a whole bunch of stuff in that space. And I'm hanging out of Discord all the time. So if you want to talk to me about anything .NET or anything Dapper or .NET related, just come find me. Archer, you want to go next? You're muted, bro.
Archer, can you?
I think he's.
Yeah, I think you want to probably move on while he figures out audio. I can go. Hey everyone, my name is Aaron. I'm a maintainer on the Dapper Docs site. I helped build out the new Hugo infrastructure and getting everything migrated over from just GitHub Markdown files. So now that everything is migrated over, we're going to be spending the next, well, I guess, especially the next couple of weeks and months, but I guess for the duration of for the project, on just writing really great documentation to get people up and running quickly, to get you into what you need to find as quickly as possible. So I'm on Discord as well. So if you ever have any suggestions, tips, or questions about the docs, GitHub issues is my preferred place. So we can track everything. If it's not in a GitHub issue on the docs repo, it doesn't exist to me. But I'm also on Discord as well. So always happy to chat about that.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Archer.
I just changed my microphone settings. Okay, so my name is Arthur. I work for Microsoft for almost 3 years now, and I work on Dapper for the last year. So right after 0.1 release. And mainly contribution was to the Java SDK. I started from scratch with some other folks helping me out. So I'm the Java SDK maintainer, and more recently, I also a runtime maintainer. So again, I'm on Discord, and if you want to have contributions to the Java SDK, for example, please reach out to me.
Great. Robert, do you want to maybe go?
Hey, I'm Rob, and you can find me as Within Boredom and.
Oh, you're muted now.
Technology. Anyway, my name's Rob, and you can find me as Within Boredom on GitHub and on Discord. I maintain the PHP SDK, and I'm located in, well, just south of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So that's really all.
Great. I think we got Charlie also on the call.
Yep. I'm Charlie. I'm have been on the Microsoft incubations team for probably about 8 or 9 months now, and I am the maintainer of the C++ SDK, which is still pre-release, and also very recently have volunteered to take over as maintainer of the Python SDK. Yeah, so by all means, reach out if you have any questions about those things.
Great.
I think, sorry, I think there's a really important question about swag on the chat. You know, so where can you get the awesome Dapper hat? So Arthur's cap, which is pretty much a star. And yeah, we also have those hoodies here, which are also pretty nice. So yeah, how can people get them?
Great question, Yaron. We are working on an expanded Dapper contributor kit program, so stay tuned on that. We did our initial purchase of that for the core team and some of the initial contributors, but there will be more information about that soon-ish. Keep an eye on the Dapper Twitter account and Discord for more info soon.
Yeah. Let me also speak as, do we have more maintainers, by the way, that didn't introduce themselves? I'm trying to look through the list here, but if somebody wants to raise a hand or drop something in the chat, let me know. But I myself, by the way, I'm Ori. I joined Dapper around 0.5, so this was last March, so almost a year ago. And I'm maintaining the docs together with Aaron, also looking after the blog and the website, and also maintainer on the samples and quick starts. So if any of those cross your path, or you have any contributions or anything, reach out on Discord or via issues. Like Aaron said, issues. If it's not an issue, it does not exist for us, or at least we'll forget about it. So we'll try to open an issue immediately. So that's the way it works. So with that, I think we covered pretty much all the maintainers. If not, please let me know. I really don't want to. I want to make sure everybody got a chance to speak. But with that, let's move on. So Dapper version 1.0 is out. Yes. So this was a huge and terrific milestone last week on Wednesday. Very, very excited. Everybody's been working so hard, and we've seen a lot of PRs come in as well. So first of all, this is like a tremendous milestone that is a cause for celebration for everybody on this call. So give it up for you and for everybody on the call. Everybody's muted, so you only heard me clapping, but that's fine. We hear it in our hearts, the clapping. Yeah, and you know, now version 1.0, if you haven't read all about it, we have an announcement blog at the blog at blog.dapr.io, which kind of lays out the journey and what it means that we are version 1.0. We're going to touch on some of that later when Mark speaks to that. But overall, just to give you some numbers around the release and things that we can kind of look at across the board that we're measuring and kind of seeing if how much of an impact this release and this announcement has made. So we've seen some tremendous impact around the announcement. This is just a few numbers around the first few days following the release, which was February 17th. We've got over 15 media mentions, which means articles. I have a whole slide about that. We crossed the 10,000 GitHub stars. We're actually, I was looking just now, we're like 30 stars shy out of 11,000 actually, I think. So that's terrific. That shows that a lot of people are checking out the repos and kind of watching them, which is great. Our tweet announcement had a lot of impressions, 180,000. That's a ton for us, at least for the Dapper handle. Just to compare, the RC3 release was around like 15,000. Tons of visitors to the blog, to the website, and to docs. So these are just amazing numbers that show that we really got a lot of attention with this release. So this is a great first measure of success. Just part of that press coverage, and these are some of the links of things. You can honestly just Google Dapper and go to the news tab on Google and just see everything that came out lately. We got a Forbes article even, Newsstack, VentureBeat, and everybody's really having a very positive sentiment toward the project and towards everything that it does. So that was also tremendous to see. I even managed to kind of find a few non-English articles that came out. Maybe if we have some of the speakers of these languages, they can say what they say, but I tried to figure out for myself. It was really hard trying with Google Translate a little bit, but it looked pretty cool. So that's terrific. And yeah, just to maybe double click a little bit about the numbers, and this is the way I kind of think about these things. You know, we got all these different activities and content pieces that we have out there. And in terms of, if you look at it as from a perspective of a user journey, somebody who's just like finding out about Dapper, then maybe evaluating it, trying it for themselves, then maybe kind of, you know, starting to become part of the community on GitHub and on Discord, and then finally contributing, we're actually seeing really terrific spikes following that announcement across the board, really. So you can see here, there's a column of baseline, which is basically the same period of time a week before the announcement. So this is the same kind of like 4 days or 5 days that are just the week before. And you can see usually a tweet, we get like 15,000 impressions. We got like 100,000 from the Dapper Dev handle, which is great to see. The website has been seeing almost like 10x visits. The blog has just exploded, of course, with the main announcement blog going over there. We got this really cool animation video. Has seen a huge spike in views, and we had that actually. A lot of those articles had that embedded. We also displayed that in Developer Week just ahead of the keynote, which was great. The docs, which is for me as a docs maintainer, I'm super happy to see that. Also, to me, that's kind of like part of the evaluation stage. I always think that if people are going to the docs, they're looking for something to do or get a really deep technical understanding of the product or the project. So that's great to see. 8,000 people started getting started, which is great, and so on and so on. And to me, the most interesting thing, and I wasn't expecting to see this for like maybe a week or two, but we're already seeing new contributors coming in. And you know, the way we measure contribution, I think I mentioned that in the past, is kind of aligned with the way CNCF does that, which means it includes PRs, of course, but also opening issues, making comments on issues and on PRs, and any GitHub activity that says that you are kind of engaging with the project. So even if you just open an issue because you found a typo, that's going to be included because we do see that as a valuable contribution. So even that we see like more than what we usually see, which is terrific, actually 4 times as much. So that's great. Yeah, and I think with that, I think that's all I've got. Yeah. So maybe with that, I'll stop sharing. And Mark, if you want to take it away, unless there are any questions at this point on the launch and some of the stuff we did. Oh, I see Aaron answering some stuff. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat here. Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything aside from what Aaron answered, but yeah, there's actually a few folks who contributed or contributing from China. They're actually part of Alibaba Cloud, and they have been talking to us about making translation of both the docs and the blog, actually, which is going to be terrific for people speaking those languages. I think these hours are a little problematic for them to join this community call, but maybe we can accommodate them in the future. But with that, I'll stop sharing, and Mark, let you take it away.
Okay, perfect. Let me share my screen here a moment. Okay, can you see my screen?
No, I don't
Not
see
yet.
it.
Oh, hang on, let's click the share button. There we go. Right now.
Yes, now we see it.
Okay, everything I'm going to talk about is in docs, but the big question that we've got with the Dapper 1.0 release is, what does it mean for versioning, support, and other things about breaking changes? And that's really the main criteria that we've kind of come out with the 1.0 release. You may have seen with our previous releases that we had these breaking changes inside here, and we were freely able to change APIs, break things on between versions and do all these breaking changes. Well, that basically has now completely changed, and you will not see these breaking changes anymore because there's a whole mechanism we have to go through. So I was going to run through today effectively what that mechanism looked like, give you a chance to ask some questions. Everything I'm going to talk about is in the docs, but I thought I'll just summarize it with a few slides because it's kind of sometimes easier to just go through it this way. So we're going to talk about versioning, support, and component certification in Dapper. Now it's at its 1.0 release. In the kind of big overview is that versioning provides a compatibility and explicit change control so that we understand how to manage any breaking changes. And the reality is that we're going to strive extremely hard now to ensure that Dapper is backwardly compatible. And we won't try to break things. We don't want to try to break APIs. And if we do, we'll be announced well in advance, at least 2 releases in advance. And if we have to deprecate features, the same thing happens there. We'll make sure that deprecation works side by side and it's announced well in advance. And so that you can now have these strong guarantees now that when you pull down the new set of binaries, you don't break your code. And if you do, there is an explicit change mechanism you have to go through and understand what that happens. So let's talk about that a bit more. So Dapper has 4 areas that we talk about versioning in. There's the actual binaries themselves. There's the APIs that you call, there's the components that you can build and use, and then there's the actual repos. I won't spend too much time on the repos, other than the repos have versioning against them all. For example, we version the documentation, components, contrib, and quick start repos, and they're typically versed with the runtime version of the repo. And the versions of the repos themselves, like runtime, will kind of follow some of the release mechanism process that we'll go through. So let's dive into each one of these areas and talk a bit more about them. So the binaries themselves, if you've been following along, you've been seeing that we've been going from all of the preview releases, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and each one of those consists of a set of packages. So we have the runtime, we have the SDKs, we have the CLI, they're all grouped together. And importantly, they actually are all versioned independently of each other. And actually can be released independently of each other. And you probably will see this in the future. For convenience, it helps that we try to put them all together. So this one time at 1.0, we've actually versioned, if you look at all the SDKs and runtime and the CLI, they're all versioned at 1.0. But they don't have to stay like that. For example, say we have to do a fix inside the Java SDK, that can be released completely independently of the others. And all of them follow along a major minor patch versioning scheme, very typical semantic versioning mechanism. I'll talk about what those actually mean. But for this first stable release that can be used in production, that means they've all been versioned at 1v1.0.0, major, minor, and patch. you'll see the next update in terms of features come along will then be a version of 1.1, just as we've been following along, meaning it's a major version, and that's its first feature update. And then any critical patches that we push out will be pushed out on the minor version. So what do those look like? What do the major, minor, and versioning mechanisms, when will those change? So effectively, they go along, just kill this here around. Effectively, major versioning happens very, very infrequently. And that will only happen when we see significant changes in the product, or if there are breaking changes that we have to take that are significant. But given there's such a high bar for breaking changes, you won't see that happen very frequently. And so you'll see probably much for the rest of this year, it'll be 1.x in terms of versioning. We'll think about when a major version gets done, maybe there's an older version that's no longer supported. Maybe it's done on a yearly basis. In fact, .NET Core does that, and they do a major version on a yearly basis. But effectively, that's going to be a very significant change when maybe there's a significant set of features or breaking changes that occur. With the minor versions, you'll see these happen quite frequently. These happen now on the ongoing releases. So you'll see the next minor version be 1.1. And that's when we add new features, new API surface, or new dependencies. And then the thing that we hope doesn't happen too much, but we're fully prepared for, in fact, we did this back at, if you were on the 0.11 release, just after we released that, we found a critical bug and find it. In fact, we found 2 critical bugs. So we actually released a 0.11.1 and a 0.11.2 soon after each other. So if we find critical bugs, which are typically reported by you, the community, hopefully all the testing's covered these things, but sometimes our full test coverage isn't there, or you miss some things, we're prepared to do a critical bug fix, which really comes down to mainline scenarios are broken, or we've done some terrible thing in terms of the build and not caught some particular feature that should have been, or bug that should have been caught. So this is for patch increments, updates, and that occurs only against the immediately supported versions, which I'll spend some more time talking about. Onto API versioning. So Dapr has a set of APIs. If you go to the API reference here in the top left-hand corner, you'll see the API reference for each one of the building blocks. Here's an example of one, the state API. It has a API version inside it all, and the API versioning follows along a versioning scheme of major, minor. So it'll go 1.0, 1.1, 1.2. And typically, we don't expect this to hopefully happen very much, but when breaking changes occur, you'll see the version number of this go from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, and the major version of that. If you reflect back, one time we added multiple state stores to Dapr. If we were to do that again, so that effectively changed the versioning scheme inside here. So we actually did introduce store name and had multiple versions of the change the actual API signature itself. If we were to do that now, given that we're at 1.0, we would actually change the API here to 2.0. So it would support both the 1.0 and the 2.0 versions of the API going forward. Minor versions may occur when you have changes, for example, in the JSON schema of the message that's sent, but we'll sort of see how those go as, and they won't change the main API signature. It'll be something in terms of the actual structure of the schema itself is where we expect minor versions to happen. So you'll always see supported versions of the version 1, version 2, version 3 as we go forward there. And of course, as we add new features, almost certainly you'll see new versions of these APIs. Component versioning. We've had some great contributions for components. The component contrib repo, just so we understand itself, is versioned according to sort of the release version of the whole runtime. So all the components get released at the same time as the runtime is released. But each one of the individual components themselves are versioned. And those are versioned just on a major version. So here's an example here. You see the Redis component. Versioning is an enforced field. You have to have this when you deploy your, describe your component. And it goes through version 1, version 2, version 3. And here we expect the version of the component to only change when there's a breaking change inside the component or a new version. So for example, say you were introducing a new Redis store, and you had to change the metadata format for it inside there, what it would look like, how it received the metadata, that would go to a version 2 of the Redis state store. So there'll be a version 1 and a version 2, both built as part of the runtime binary that pulls from the component contrib. So we can expect multiple versions of those, and it could be quite appropriate that you use both the version 1 and version 2 of the same component inside your application. So there are multiple versions, those go over time. Maybe in time we'll also deprecate those versions. So if you've got, imagine that the states or component of Redis got to version 10 one day, you can just imagine that there was be deprecation of some of the earlier versions, but that's not actually expected. Component certification itself, we put this in kind of as we run up to the V1 release, where we actually put a certification process in place. You can go and look at this in the docs. So actually, if I just step out here, I want to make sure that we understand where this is inside the docs. You can actually see the certificate life cycle of a component is described inside this operations components certification life cycle for the components inside here. And it describes the life cycle of a component. And effectively, a life cycle of a component goes through alpha, beta, and general availability, where when you first build the component, it's in an alpha stage. It requires that the component has just been published. It may be buggy. Not all conformance test cases are in place. It hasn't necessarily been certainly put fully into production usage. Beta itself is when we start to write conformance tests against the component and make sure that it's in a more stable state. And then general availability is when we've taken components and we've had at least verification that this is running in at least two external production customers or users in solutions. So we get sort of the general verification that this is actually being used in a production scenario. And all that gets captured inside an issue that we get tracked, so we can go back to a particular issue and say, yes, this particular component met this certification status on this particular date, and these people verified it at that point in time. So this document sort of describes that. And you'll see that the important thing here is getting conformance test suites written. So we wrote a conformance test suite. We covered quite a few components. You'll see that components that are actually set to GA are actually marked inside the components status inside each one of the tables inside the documentation. So you can see both the component version here. You'll see that all components will put at version 1, but some components are set to GA status, and the majority of them are still at alpha status, which means that to a large degree we've still got to put some test cases in place to make sure that these conform to the component certification test lifecycle, coupled with the fact that we need verification that these things are actually being used in production in order to get them to GA. So if there's one thing that you could really, really, really help us with is, if you have favorite components that you're using here, I mean, we know that many of these are actually being used today, but we don't necessarily have full verification of these things. So if there are components that you're using inside here, for example, say you're using the MySQL component or one of these other state stores, we would love for you to help contribute to build out some of the component certification test cases that we put inside there in order to get it to beta status. And if you are using it in production, please go to the issue for the particular component or create one, verify that you're using this so we can get more and more of these components into a GA status and get that verification. And that's a big ask that we have, and help us kind of make sure that we have full verification of these components so that we understand where they are in their certification process. By the way, this is very closely mirrored in other open source projects to do a similar thing across components and APIs that they have. Finally, for releases themselves, you'll see that releases actually going to be supported for the 2 releases, the current version and the previous version. And that's both for the patching support. So if there is a patch that we have to done, which is a critical patch, or we have to, and the 2 releases that come out for the major and minor versions, you'll see those as supported releases. If you are on an older release, so that means there is effectively a moving window. So there's this moving window. They'll see 1.0 now, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and there'll be a sliding window. And that allows us to make sure that we maintain an up-to-date set of bug fixes, a set of test suites we run against this all. It's not possible to maintain support for innumerable number of releases. So you'll see it for the current and the previous. If you do kind of drop off the the release train, as it were, and say one day we're at release 1.8 and you're on a 1.2, you will probably be required to upgrade through each one of the releases themselves to get back up to a current supported release. in order to ask and talk about hot fixes. So if you say, I found an issue inside this release, and we say, well, is that release, and we're at release 1.8, for example, and you're on, say, release 1.2, and you say, I found a bug, we'll say, well, great, you'll have to get into one of the 2 supported releases first and test it in that environment before we can issue a hot fix against that because of some reported issue. So that's just be realize that there's this rolling window, and within the 2 supported releases as a requirement in order to kind of request or think about hot fixes that need to be done. You'll see that in our docs, we've actually published the 1 supported release at the moment that we have, which is basically the 1.0 release that we released last week. You see the runtime version here, the CLI version, and this is the group of released binaries that have been tested together that have made sure that this is the package of these that run together. If we release, for example, one of these packages independently, say the Java SDK was released and would go to say a 1.01 because there's a patch, we would update this supported release inside here for some of those minor releases, those patch releases as well as those minor releases. So you should see inside here a set of supported releases here with the status inside here. And if I just go back to the documentation again, you'll see that there is this document here under operations support. We talk about the versioning policy I went through here, and this is where those supported releases are kept. So this is where this will be updated at any point in time. While I'm here, you'll see that also that we talk about upgrade paths. So we actually tested that if you're on the 0.11, which was our last verified preview release, we actually tested that you could actually upgrade that to the 1.0 release using the Dapper CLI for upgrade and using the Dapper CLI for this. And the same for upgrade for how we went from our release candidates. We actually put notes inside the 1.0 release about how you could upgrade from these. But going forward, of course, the 1.0 is the main supported release around these things. And I think with that, I think that was my last slide I was touching on at this point. Yes, at this point, I can take some questions around these things and,
Yeah, thank you, Mark. There was a question there about how often are releases coming out. Your own answer that I think we'll start seeing release every around 4 weeks, but we haven't really established a fixed time for that. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, the current release schedule, we actually did sort of from when we first released Dapper in October of 2019 until the 1.0 release, we actually did 14 releases. So they kind of were approximately every 4 to 6 weeks. I think that was quite a fast pace. What you'll see now is that you'll probably see a slightly slower pace than that. I expect that there will be at least 6 weeks between releases. So we actually put in, actually I wrote in our support policy that we expect that the release to be a rolling window of sort of 6 weeks, 2 lots of 6 weeks. So it's sort of a 3-month rolling window around the supported releases around these things. I expect actually a little bit longer than that, but that's kind of the expectation.
Yeah, and I think just in the context of the question, the way it was phrased, how often is 2 releases? I think if this goes to the idea of the rolling window, that's why it's defined by releases and not by time, right? Because as long as the release is the latest release, it's being supported and the release behind it. Whether those releases kind of come up a little faster, a little slower, that's why we kind of keep that window in the defined by releases and not by time.
Correct. Yeah. So there isn't actually any specified time. Per se, it isn't going to be a fixed time with these releases, but we want to make sure that we get bug fixes out frequently, add new features inside here, and address kind of an ongoing window. And it's important to have a regular cadence around these things, which we'll maintain. Just expect it to be slightly slower than it has been.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Not sure if we have any more questions, but feel free to drop them in if you have more, and we'll get to them at the final stage. If not, then Yaron and Artur can talk about performance and security audits.
Yeah, I'll take it away. Let me share my screen and let me know when you can see it.
We see it.
Great. So we're going to talk about security now. And the first thing that I'm going to say about security is that inside of our docs page, if you go and see under concepts, we have this really nice security section here which gives you a pretty good overview about all of the security features of Dapr and how it's being implemented both in Kubernetes and also in the self-hosted version, how it does authentication between the sidecar and the app, how mutual TLS is being addressed, some security features for establishing access only between a given application and secrets or components. How do we do with network security, recommendations for bindings and state store security. And there is also a threat model here that you can look at with all sorts of nice flying arrows and rectangulars. So yeah. And there is also a security audit section, which is going to be what I'm talking about today. So Dapr underwent 2 security audits. The first was in June 2020. Both of them were done by an external vendor called Cure53. It's a German-based penetration testing and security audit company, CNCF approved. Did most of the major security audits for CNCF projects. And we published the report from June 2020 when it came out. At that point in time, we had 0 criticals, 1 high issue and a couple of mediums. And we had a second one, which you can see here from February. So for the 1.0 version that was released, you can find the full report here. So if you click on it, it'll take you there and it'll basically show you all of the identified vulnerabilities and the history of it. And the current status is that Dapr has 0 criticals, 0 highs, 0 mediums. There are 2 lows and 2 informationals, which is maybe something that we should, oh, actually it is in the report, yeah. And so this is a pretty good section to read, and I recommend reading the security audit too. Okay, so because we're a little short in time, let's go into performance section. So we also have a section on performance under operations here, performance and scalability. Arthur is going to talk about actor performance in a sec. I'm going to be talking about the service invocation performance. Dapr has an elaborate performance test infrastructure. It basically runs on Kubernetes, and it examines the added latency and resource usage for the Dapr sidecar when compared against an application that invokes another application without Dapr. So we're basically running this on Kubernetes. We're using Fortio, which is the load testing tool used by Istio. And we're also using the test parameters that are used by the Istio tests that are being run. And so we're testing an application talking directly to another application without Dapr, without mutual TLS, and without tracing. And then we have a second test where the communications go through the Dapr service invocation building block, where we limit the Dapr sidecar to half a core, half a virtual CPU. We enable MTLS, and we enable telemetry with 0.1 sampling rate and a payload of 1 kilobyte. So the test runs with 1,000 requests per second with mutual TLS telemetry and the sidecar being limited to half a virtual CPU. And we can see that the control plane performance in terms of resource usage is pretty low. You will find this table here that tells you exactly which types of operations can affect CPU and memory consumption for the Dapr control plane. So for example, Sentry, which is the Dapr certificate authority, can have its virtual CPU usage go up and down based on the number of certificate requests, which is essentially based on the number of sidecars that are running in the cluster. Same thing goes for the sidecar injector. So if you're now deploying, 1,000 instances of your pod, all of them will get an admission request. And so this might affect the virtual CPU count here. In terms of the data plane performance, which I think is the most critical thing here. So for the test I've shown you above, the sidecar uses 0.48 virtual CPUs and 23 megabytes per 1,000 requests per second with mutual TLS. And it adds 1.4 milliseconds to the 90th percentile and 2.10 milliseconds to the 99th percentile. And those are pretty good. I don't want to perform comparisons here to other service meshes, which also use sidecars, but I will just say that this performance level is on par or better than what you would find. And I also think that with the recent addition into the Dapper master branch, where we upgraded to Go 1.16, this actually improved. I think, I'm not certain, but I think this is down to 1.2 now. And the 99th percentile is around 2 milliseconds. So this is basically the added latency when an application calls its Dapper sidecar, that Dapper sidecar calls the target Dapper sidecar over the network, and then that Dapper sidecar calls the app, and then all the way through back to the caller application. So you can see the latencies here with the graphs, and that's it. So I think I will let Arthur talk about the actor performance section.
Yaron, quickly, there's a question about if you know how it compares to Envoy.
So Envoy, the Envoy tests are that I know are in relation to the Istio benchmarks that were released by a test that was done, if I'm not mistaken, by Buoyant, which is the company behind Linkerd, where they compared Linkerd to Envoy. I don't remember by heart, but what I can tell you now for certain is that Dapper has less memory usage. That's basically what I remember. If you want to know specifically, so come talk to me on Discord. My handle is Yaron2, and I will give you the Envoy performance benchmarks that we use to basically compare against. But Dapper has a lower memory usage, and I think around the same sort of CPU usage. Maybe Dapper has a little bit lower CPU usage there. In terms of latency, we're going to have to take a look at the latest tests for Envoy.
Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So just the same website that Yara was displaying. The actor task is slightly different than the invocation because we're not comparing a raw HTTP call here. We are just comparing absolute numbers. So it's a slightly different. So the goal for the actor performance test initially was to make sure we could achieve 30,000 actor activations in a minute. And for that, we will need to do 500 QPS approximately. So we use the same infrastructure that we use in the service invocation performance. So I'm not going to repeat my what was said here. But the test is different, like I said. So we limit at 500 QPS because that would be the magic number to reach 30,000 actors in a minute. We only use one replica. So you should be able to achieve that without any kind of distribution. 1 minute duration, of course. The sidecar is limited to 0.5 CPU. MTLS is enabled. Sidecar telemetry is with a sample 0.1. And here we do slightly different where we have an empty payload to perform this test, okay? So when you use Fortio, this way, what you are looking for here is a measurement called actual throughput. So the actual throughput is what your system could actually sustain that load. So, and we want to make sure that it's very, very close to what we define as the baseline. So here is 500 QPS, and the actual result is like 499.99. It's like so close that we can round to 500 QPS. TP90 is 3 milliseconds. TP9090 is 6.2, and these are absolute numbers. They might be fast or slow, depends on the use case. Okay, so these are just absolute numbers. The app consumption here is something I'd like to clarify. We are using a Java app here, and remember, when you're using actors, the runtime implemented on the app that uses heavily the Dapr SDK plays a big role in the performance. So for this particular test, we used the Java SDK mainly because that's where we saw some problems initially. So we decided to battle test that first. But the same thing can be done with any SDK. So this memory consumption here includes the Java, the JVM, and all the instances that are needed to create for actors. The Dapr sidecar consumption, the CPU was kind of a small 2 CPU, and then the memory was 18 megabytes. So another thing that's important in this type of test, it's not only the performance, but also the stress of the system. So we're also testing the stress part here in this test. So we assert, there's an assertion in the test that there was no app restarts and there's no sidecar restarts. And these tests run, I don't know if you probably not sure that, runs periodically against master. And we have assertions. So if there's a change that deviates these numbers by a given margin, we will fail the performance test. So we have this running periodically with automatic assertions, okay? And if you want to take a look at the test or write more, you can look at the Dapr repo and the Dapr/test/perf. You can take a look at all the tests. We also have timer performance tests here as well for actors, but we did not publish that result yet. And that's it. That's all I wanted to demo. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Arthur. We're almost out of time, but I saw in the chat that there's a little bit of a discussion around when to use actors and maybe scenarios. I saw Xavier kind of pointing out a couple of use cases around gaming and IoT. I know, Mark, Arthur, if you want to maybe speak to that, what's a general guidance of what's a good idea for an actor?
Yeah, I do recognize that our actor docs, the intro, probably could do with a little bit more kind of some of the why behind it all and things like that. There is some there already. But actors, effectively, think of them as units of computer data together. So they are the ideal scenarios around things like the representation of a virtual device. So you can hold say a particular device, like an IoT device, and they can have all its state associated with it and all the compute methods on them. So they're an encapsulation of state and compute together through functions and data that you can manage. You can have thousands of them or millions of them, and they're all running independently. So an IoT device or a gaming session, very commonly used as well. Like if you look at the Zeiss and the Ignition Group case studies we wrote up recently, they use them to represent stateful long-running workflows. So they represent an order ID. So an order comes in, it's a particular ID for a workflow. The workflow maintains the state of the order. If it's a simple order, it can just maintain the state itself. If it wants to be more complicated, it can spin it off to using a workflow engine under the covers, something like Argo or Windows Workflow Foundation or Logic Apps is one of the examples. And so those are typical examples of how you use actors. We see a lot of them used in IoT devices and gaming, actually. So they're representing sort of like gaming session state or something like that. Those are some of the ideas, but I'll put some more examples inside there. Over the years, we've done lots of different types of actor implementations with customers, both through Service Fabric and through other ones like Orleans as other actor models, and we've seen them to be very, very successful. You have to be careful that you don't use them in scenarios where you chain lots of actors together, because they're all single-threaded by definition, because it makes them easy to use. But if you call one actor and another actor, you get this chaining of them, and that can affect performance greatly. So you tend to have them in these individualized scenarios representing code and state together.
Great, thank you, Mark. I dropped in links for the Zeiss and Ignition Group case studies, but please feel free to drop into Discord, and we can continue these conversations there. I'm sure some folks can maybe suggest some of the use cases they're working on actors. We got a few people using them. I know Xavier in Roadwork, they're considering it as well. Yeah, so let's continue all this discussion in Discord. I want to thank you again, everybody, for joining. And congratulations to everyone on the recent release. This is all of ours celebration. So thank you again for joining, and see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.